You lost your keys again? Those 4 words shattered what was left of my dignity like glass hitting concrete. I used to be the center of my family's universe. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to open these old wounds. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a modest 2-bedroom house in Queens, New York, the same house where I raised my son David and where my late husband Robert built a garden with his own hands. The morning light filters through the lace curtains I've had for 30 years, casting familiar shadows across the hardwood floors that creak in all the places I've learned to step lightly. I'm wearing my favorite cardigan, the navy blue one with pearl buttons that David gave me for Mother's Day 8 years ago, back when he still remembered such things. My fingers, weathered and marked with age spots, trace the worn fabric as I sit at my kitchen table, the same table where I served thousands of meals, helped with homework, and listened to teenage heartbreaks until dawn. The house smells of chamomile tea and the faint scent of Robert's aftershave that somehow still lingers in the bedroom after 3 years since his passing. Everything here tells a story of a life lived in service to others, of a woman who believed that love was measured in sacrifices made and comfort provided. But this morning, as I stare at the empty chair across from me where Robert used to read his newspaper and share stories about his patients from the clinic, I'm haunted by a realization that's been creeping into my consciousness like fog rolling in from the harbor. I can't remember the last time someone asked me how I was feeling. Not the polite, "How are you?" that cashiers and neighbors offer as social currency, but the kind of genuine inquiry that expects an honest answer, the kind that waits for the response, the kind that cares about the silence that follows. Yesterday, I spent 43 minutes looking for my house keys. They were in my purse, exactly where I always keep them. But somehow I'd convinced myself I'd lost them completely. My hands shook as I searched through drawers, under cushions, behind picture frames, the same frantic searching I've been doing more frequently lately, always for things that turn out to be exactly where they should be. When David arrived for his weekly visit, the obligatory Sunday afternoon check-in that feels more like a parole officer's appointment than a son visiting his mother, he found me in the kitchen, quietly putting the keys back in their designated spot in my purse. The relief I felt was immediately replaced by shame as I watched his expression shift from mild concern to something that looked dangerously close to pity. "You lost your keys again?" he said. Not as a question, but as a statement of fact, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd already decided what this meant about my mental state, my independence, my future. Those words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were said with such casual certainty, as if my momentary confusion was evidence of something irreversible, as if I'd already crossed some invisible line that separated the woman who raised him from the burden he now felt obligated to manage. David is 48 years old, a successful cardiologist who inherited his father's gentle hands and methodical mind, but somehow missed the warmth that made Robert such a beloved physician. He stands 6 feet tall, with graying temples that make him look distinguished rather than old, wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that whisper rather than shout about success. His wife, Jennifer, rarely visits anymore. She's polite when she does, but I can see the calculations behind her eyes. How long will this visit last? What will be expected of her? How can she minimize the time spent in this house that smells like old people and contains too many memories of a life she never shared? My granddaughter Emma is 16 now, more interested in her phone than in the stories I used to tell her about her grandfather's adventures as a young doctor, or the recipes I'd hoped to pass down through generations of women who understood that cooking was an act of love made tangible. The house feels different when they're here now, not filled with the warm chaos of family gathering, but heavy with the burden of obligation. They move through the rooms like visitors in a museum, careful not to disturb anything, counting the minutes until they can return to their real lives. I watch David's eyes as he surveys the living room, taking inventory of potential hazards, the Persian rug that might cause falls, the ceramic vases that could break and cut someone, the stairs that lead to the bedroom where his father died peacefully in his sleep. Everything I treasure becomes evidence of my incompetence in his assessment. "Mom, "We need to talk about your living situation," he says, settling into Robert's chair with the authority of someone who's already made the decision and is simply informing me of the conclusion. The words hang in the air like smoke from a fire I can't see but can certainly smell. My living situation. Not my home, not my life, not my choices. My living situation, as if I'm a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. I pour myself another cup of tea with hands that tremble slightly. From emotion, not age, though I doubt anyone would believe that distinction matters anymore. The china cup was part of my wedding set, one of the few pieces that survived David's childhood and Emma's visits when she was small enough to believe that tea parties with grandmothers were the height of sophisticated entertainment. "I'm fine here," I say, though the words sound hollow even to my own ears. "You're not fine, Mom. You're forgetting things. Important things. Mrs. Patterson next door called Jennifer last week because you left your garden hose running for 6 hours. You could have flooded the basement. I remember that day clearly. I'd been watering the tomatoes Robert planted in his last spring, trying to keep alive the small miracle of green growth that connects me to the man who understood that nurturing something requires daily attention, not grand gestures. I'd gotten distracted by a phone call from the doctor's office, confirming an appointment that David had insisted I make. And yes, I'd forgotten about the hose. But 6 hours? Had it really been 6 hours? The uncertainty gnaws at me as I sit across from my son, this stranger who shares my eyes and my late husband's stubborn chin, but seems to have inherited none of the compassion that made Robert such a beloved presence in our community. When did David become someone who collects evidence of my failures instead of celebrating the small victories that make each day bearable? "I made a mistake," I say, proud that my voice remains steady. "People make mistakes. Not mistakes like these, Mom. Not forgetting to turn off water, not losing keys every other day, not calling me at 3 a.m. because you thought someone was breaking in when it was just the neighbor's cat." Each accusation lands with precision, building a case I'm not allowed to defend. Yes, I called him that night, but only because the sounds in the darkness had seemed so real, so threatening. Yes, I've misplaced my keys, but don't we all occasionally put things in wrong places? Yes, I left the hose running, but I was thinking about Robert, remembering how he'd taught me to water slowly, deeply, giving the roots time to drink. These aren't signs of dementia. They're signs of grief, of loneliness, of a woman trying to maintain a life that was designed for 2 people, but now contains only one. But as I look at David's face, I realize that explaining this would be useless. He's already decided that I'm declining, that my independence is a danger to myself and an inconvenience to others. He's already planning my future without consulting me about my present. The afternoon sun slants through the window, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like tiny spirits. This light, this angle, this particular quality of golden warmth, it's the same light that used to make Emma laugh when she was small, reaching out to catch the dancing particles in her small hands, believing she could capture magic if she was quick enough. Now Emma barely looks up from her phone, and the magic has been replaced by the harsh fluorescent reality of aged care assessments and living situation evaluations. The photo album sits heavy in my lap, its leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. Inside, 47 years of memories arranged in chronological order, the kind of meticulous documentation that only mothers maintain, believing that somehow preserving these moments will make them eternal. David's first steps, captured in a blurry Polaroid where you can barely make out his chubby legs, but his triumphant smile blazes clear and bright. His high school graduation, where he towers over Robert and me, his cap slightly askew, his arm draped around my shoulders like I'm the most precious thing in his world. His medical school acceptance letter, which I laminated and kept in my purse for 3 years because I was so proud I couldn't stop showing it to strangers in grocery stores. Each photograph tells a story of sacrifice that David has either forgotten or chosen to ignore. The summer he turned 8, Robert was working double shifts at the clinic to pay for David's piano lessons. I took on extra hours at the elementary school where I worked as a teaching assistant, arriving at dawn to help set up classrooms and staying until evening to grade papers that weren't even my responsibility. We ate spaghetti with butter for dinner 17 nights that month because it was all we could afford, after paying Mrs. Henderson for the lessons that David insisted he needed. I remember standing in the kitchen, stirring that simple pasta, while listening to him practice scales in the living room. The notes weren't always perfect, but they filled our small house with music that felt like hope made audible. Robert would catch my eye across the room and smile, both of us understanding that this was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but the quiet daily choices to prioritize our child's dreams over our own comfort. David played piano for exactly 18 months before deciding he preferred baseball. We never mentioned the money spent on lessons or the instrument we'd bought secondhand and polished until it gleamed. We just signed him up for Little League and bought him cleats that cost more than we spent on groceries that week. When he was 15, David announced he wanted to go to medical school. Like Dad, the pride in Robert's eyes was worth every sacrifice that followed. We refinanced the house to pay for his pre-med courses, cashed in our small retirement savings to cover his MCAT prep, and I took a second job cleaning offices at night to help with his undergraduate expenses. I remember those nights, pushing a vacuum cleaner through empty corporate hallways while the city slept around me. My back ached, my hands were raw from cleaning chemicals, and I was always exhausted. But I would think about David bent over his textbooks, his face illuminated by the desk lamp we'd bought him for his 18th birthday, and the pain would transform into something that felt almost like privilege. The night he got into Columbia Medical School, we celebrated with champagne that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. David hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and he whispered in my ear, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mom. I'm going to make you proud." I was already proud. I'd been proud since the day he was born, when the nurse placed him in my arms, and I felt my heart expand to accommodate a love I didn't know was possible. But hearing him acknowledge what we'd given him, what we'd sacrificed for his future, it made every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every delayed dream feel like the most important work I'd ever done. The wedding photographs are harder to look at now. David in his black tuxedo, tall and handsome and radiating the confidence that comes from knowing you're loved unconditionally. Jennifer in her designer dress, beautiful and poised, and already looking at me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be embraced. I'd spent 3 months planning that wedding, handling details that Jennifer's mother dismissed as too small to worry about. I addressed every invitation by hand because Jennifer wanted a personal touch, but didn't want to spend the money on professional calligraphy. I spent weekends shopping for centerpieces that fit their budget, driving to flower markets at dawn to find the best deals on the arrangements that would make her vision come to life. The night before the wedding, I stayed up until 3 a.m., arranging boutonnieres, my fingers stained with florist tape and my eyes burning from exhaustion. Robert found me in the kitchen, surrounded by white roses and baby's breath, and gently suggested I go to bed. "I'm almost finished," I said, though I had 20 more boutonnieres to complete. "I want everything to be perfect for David." Robert sat beside me and began helping with the delicate work, his surgeon's hands steady and precise. "You know he loves you just as much whether these flowers are perfect or not," he said softly. But I needed them to be perfect. I needed Jennifer to see that I cared about her happiness, that I respected her dreams, that I could be the mother-in-law who enhanced rather than complicated her new life. I needed David to know that I would always prioritize his joy over my comfort, his future over my present. The flowers were perfect. The wedding was beautiful. Jennifer's mother spent the reception pointing out the few things that didn't meet her standards. But I didn't care. I watched David dance with his new wife, saw the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, and felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've helped create something beautiful. Jennifer thanked me exactly once, in a brief note that came with the professional wedding photos 3 months later. "Thank you for all your help with the wedding preparations," she wrote in handwriting that looked like it had been taught by expensive tutors. "We couldn't have done it without you." But even then, I sensed the distance in her words, the subtle suggestion that my contributions were appreciated but not particularly necessary. She was already pregnant with Emma, already planning a life that would gradually push me to the margins of their family story. When Emma was born, I offered to help with childcare, Jennifer's mother had volunteered to fly in from California, but I thought surely there was room for both grandmothers in this new baby's life. I imagined myself rocking Emma to sleep, teaching her the lullabies I'd sung to David, passing down the stories that connected her to generations of women who'd found strength in nurturing others. "We have everything covered," Jennifer said when I offered to stay overnight during those first difficult weeks. "My mother has experience with newborns, and David needs his rest for his residency." I understood. New mothers need their own mothers, not their mothers-in-law. I told myself this was natural, temporary, that once Jennifer felt more confident, there would be opportunities for me to build my own relationship with Emma. But those opportunities never came. Jennifer's mother extended her visit indefinitely, moving into their guest room and establishing herself as the primary grandmother, the one who knew Emma's feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, her favorite songs. I became the Sunday visitor, the one who brought gifts and offered help that was politely declined. I swallowed my disappointment and waited. Surely when Emma was older, when she could walk and talk and choose her own relationships, there would be space for me in her world. I bought books about child development, learned about age-appropriate activities, prepared myself to be the kind of grandmother who created magical memories. But by the time Emma was old enough to form preferences, I'd already been categorized as the other grandmother, the one who didn't really understand children, who offered the wrong snacks, who told stories that weren't as interesting as the ones Jennifer's mother shared about her glamorous life in Hollywood. I remember the Christmas when Emma was 4, when I gave her a handmade doll that I'd spent weeks creating. The dress was sewn from fabric I'd saved from my own childhood. The hair was made from yarn I'd dyed to match Emma's blonde curls, and the face was embroidered with tiny stitches that took me hours to perfect. Emma opened the gift, looked at the doll with polite confusion, and immediately set it aside to play with the electronic toy that Jennifer's mother had brought. "Say thank you to Grandma Margaret," Jennifer prompted, and Emma dutifully mumbled the words before returning to her flashing, beeping distraction. I watched that handmade doll sit forgotten in the corner while Emma played with plastic toys that would be broken and discarded within months. I told myself it didn't matter, that the joy was in the making, not the receiving. But late that night, I found myself crying in the bathroom, grieving for the connection I'd hoped to build through threads and fabric, and the kind of love that takes time to create. The photo album grows heavier as I flip through the later pages. David's graduation from medical school, where he thanked Jennifer's family in his speech, but never mentioned the years Robert and I had scraped together tuition money. Emma's birthday parties, where I stand at the edge of group photos, smiling but somehow separate from the central family unit. Holiday gatherings where I'm included but not essential, present but not particularly valued. Was I used? The question forms itself in my mind like a whisper, soft but insistent. All those years of sacrifice, of putting David's needs before my own, of supporting his dreams with my labor and my money and my time. Was it love, or was it just convenient for everyone involved? My 72nd birthday arrived on a Tuesday in March, gray and cold with the kind of persistent drizzle that makes the whole world feel forgotten. I woke up with the strange optimism that birthdays bring, even at my age. That flutter of possibility that maybe today would be different, special, remembered. I'd made subtle hints to David during our last phone call. Not obvious requests, just gentle mentions of the date, the way mothers do when they're hoping their children will surprise them with spontaneous thoughtfulness. March 15th is coming up, I'd said, trying to keep my voice light. Hard to believe another year has passed. He'd replied, distracted by something on his computer. Listen, Mom, I have to go. Patient emergency. Patient emergency. The phrase that had ended countless conversations over the years, David's professional obligations always taking precedence over personal connections. I understood. I'd been married to a doctor after all, but understanding didn't make the dismissal hurt any less. I spent the morning of my birthday cleaning the house, as if expecting visitors who would never come. I polished the silver tea service that Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, arranged fresh flowers in the vase that David had made in elementary school pottery class, and set out the photo albums in case someone wanted to look through old memories together. The mailbox contained bills, advertisements, and a single birthday card from my dentist's office. One of those automated greetings that arrives with mechanical punctuality, signed by a receptionist who's never met me, but whose job requires her to maintain the illusion of personal connection. By noon, I couldn't pretend anymore. I called David's office. "Dr. Chen is with a patient," his secretary said, with the practiced politeness of someone who'd been trained to deflect personal calls. "Can I take a message? Could you just tell him his mother called? It's my birthday." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds too long. "Oh, of course. I'll make sure he gets the message." But he didn't call back. Not that day, not the next. When we finally spoke a week later, he never mentioned the missed birthday. I didn't bring it up either, unwilling to force acknowledgement of something that should have been automatic. Emma, now a senior in high school, had apparently inherited her parents' gift for strategic forgetting. The girl who used to make me hand-drawn cards with stick figures and crooked hearts hadn't even sent a text. I told myself she was busy with college applications, with the important business of building her own future. But late at night, scrolling through her social media posts, I saw the elaborate celebration she'd organized for her friend's birthday just 2 weeks before mine. The photos showed a group of teenagers at an expensive restaurant, laughing and embracing around a table laden with gifts and flowers. Emma had written a lengthy post about how much this friend meant to her, how grateful she was for their friendship, how special birthdays were for celebrating the people you love. I stared at that post until my eyes burned, wondering when I'd stopped being someone worth celebrating. The forgotten birthday was just one note in a symphony of small cruelties that had been building for months. There was the Thanksgiving when David called to cancel at the last minute, because Jennifer's mother was visiting and, you know how she gets when there are too many people. I'd already cooked for 8, the turkey browning in the oven, the sweet potatoes candied exactly the way David had loved them since childhood. I ate alone that day, the silence broken only by the sound of my own chewing and the distant laughter of neighbors celebrating with their families. I wrapped the leftovers in careful portions and froze them, thinking maybe David would want to take some home later. They're still in my freezer, crystallized monuments to hope that curdled into humiliation. Christmas was worse. I'd spent weeks knitting Emma a sweater in her favorite color, counting stitches while watching old movies, imagining her face when she opened the gift. The pattern was complex, full of cables and intricate details that required my full attention. My arthritis made the work painful, but I pushed through because I wanted to give her something made with love, something that couldn't be bought in a store. When Emma opened the package, she held up the sweater with the kind of polite smile that people reserve for gifts they'll never use. "Thanks, Grandma Margaret," she said, already reaching for the next present. "It's very crafty, as if the hours of work, the careful attention to her measurements, the love woven into every stitch, could be dismissed with a word that suggested amateur enthusiasm rather than skilled devotion." Jennifer's mother had given Emma a designer purse that cost more than I spend on groceries in 3 months. Emma squealed with delight, hugging her Grandma Linda with genuine enthusiasm, modeling the purse for photos that would immediately be shared on social media. My sweater was folded and set aside, eventually ending up in Emma's closet where it hung unworn until she cleaned out her room for college, at which point it was donated to charity without ever touching her skin. The doctor's appointments became another source of quiet humiliation. After Robert's death, I'd struggled with managing all the medical details that he'd previously handled. I'd asked David to help me organize my medications, to come with me to important appointments, to help me understand the insurance paperwork that seemed designed to confuse people my age. "You need to be more independent, Mom," he'd said when I asked him to accompany me to a cardiology appointment. "You can't rely on me for everything." But I wasn't relying on him for everything. I was asking for help with the overwhelming bureaucracy of aging, the way I'd once helped him navigate the complexities of childhood. I was asking for the kind of support that families provide each other, not out of obligation, but out of love. Instead, I sat alone in waiting rooms, surrounded by other elderly patients who also seemed to be managing their health care in isolation. I watched younger people accompany their parents to appointments, taking notes, asking questions, providing the kind of advocacy that I'd once provided for David when he was too young to speak for himself. The appointment that broke something inside me was with my ophthalmologist. I'd been having trouble with my vision, words blurring when I tried to read, headaches that came from straining to see clearly. The doctor wanted to discuss surgical options that were complicated and expensive. I'd asked David to come with me, explaining that I needed someone to help me understand the medical terminology, to remember the details that I might miss. "I can't take time off work for routine appointments," he'd said. "Just take notes." But my hands shake when I'm nervous, and my handwriting has become increasingly difficult to read. I sat in that sterile office, trying to write down words I didn't understand, nodding politely while the doctor explained procedures that would determine whether I'd spend my remaining years in clear sight or increasing darkness. Afterward, I called David to explain what the doctor had said. I could hear the impatience in his voice as I stumbled through the medical terminology, trying to convey information I'd only half understood. "Mom, I can't diagnose you over the phone," he said. "If you need a second opinion, call another doctor. Call another doctor." As if I were a stranger seeking medical advice, rather than his mother asking for help navigating a frightening diagnosis. The emergency room visit was the final proof of how completely I'd been abandoned. I'd fallen in the bathroom at 2 a.m., my legs giving out as I tried to get up from the toilet. The pain in my hip was sharp and immediate, and I couldn't get up from the cold tile floor. I lay there for 20 minutes, trying to summon the strength to pull myself upright, before finally accepting that I needed help. I called David, my fingers shaking as I dialed his number. "Mom, it's 2 a.m, he answered, his voice thick with sleep and annoyance. "I fell," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I can't get up. I think I might have hurt my hip." There was a pause, and I could hear Jennifer's voice in the background, asking what was wrong. Then David's voice, muffled as he covered the phone. "It's my mother. She fell." When he came back on the line, his tone was businesslike. "Call an ambulance, Mom. I'll meet you at the hospital." But he didn't meet me at the hospital. He arrived 3 hours later, after I'd been examined, x-rayed, and diagnosed with a severe bruise but no fracture. He stayed for exactly 15 minutes, just long enough to speak with the doctor and sign the discharge papers. "You're fine," he said, helping me into a wheelchair with the efficiency of someone completing a task rather than caring for a loved one. "Just be more careful next time. Be more careful." As if I'd chosen to fall, as if my aging body were a personal failure rather than a natural consequence of time's passage. The ride home was silent except for the sound of rain against the car windows. David helped me into the house, made sure I could walk without assistance, and left without offering to stay, without asking if I needed anything, without acknowledging that lying on a bathroom floor for 20 minutes might have been terrifying for a woman who lived alone. That night, I sat in my bedroom, staring at the bathroom where I'd fallen, and realized that I was completely alone, not just physically, but emotionally. I had become a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved, a problem to be solved rather than a mother to be cherished. I opened my jewelry box and pulled out the gold locket that Robert had given me on our wedding day. Inside was a tiny photograph of David as a baby, his face round and innocent, his eyes bright with the trust that babies have for the people who care for them. I held that locket until dawn, remembering the weight of him in my arms, the way he'd looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. When had I stopped being important? When had my love become an inconvenience rather than a gift? The questions burned in my chest like acid, eating away at decades of certainty about my place in the world. I'd built my identity around being David's mother, Robert's wife, Emma's grandmother. But what was I now that those roles had been stripped of meaning, reduced to obligation rather than affection? I was nothing. I was no one. I was a woman whose love had been consumed and discarded, whose sacrifices had been forgotten, whose very existence had become an embarrassment to the people she'd devoted her life to serving. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, thick and official, bearing the letterhead of Morrison & Associates Financial Planning. Inside, David's signature appeared on documents I'd never seen before, paperwork that transferred my investment accounts into a managed care trust, with him as the primary beneficiary and decision-maker. My hands trembled as I read the legal language that essentially declared me incompetent to handle my own finances. The accounts that Robert and I had built together over 40 years of careful saving, the certificates of deposit that represented our dreams of traveling in retirement, the modest stock portfolio that was supposed to ensure I could live independently, all of it now required David's approval for any transaction over $500. I hadn't signed these papers. I hadn't even known they existed. The phone call I made to the financial planning office confirmed my worst fears. "Mrs. Chen, your son presented medical documentation suggesting you were experiencing cognitive decline," the advisor explained with practiced sympathy. "He was concerned about your ability to manage complex financial decisions. The trust structure protects your assets while ensuring your care needs are met." Medical documentation. David had used his credentials as a physician to convince strangers that I was mentally incompetent, despite never having formally examined me or suggested I see a neurologist. He'd weaponized his professional authority to steal my autonomy. I hung up the phone and stared at the kitchen table where I'd paid bills for decades, where I'd balanced checkbooks and calculated budgets with the precision that had allowed us to raise a family on a teacher's salary and a young doctor's modest income. The same table where I'd taught David to count money, to understand the value of saving, to appreciate the security that comes from financial responsibility. That afternoon, I drove to David's office for the first time in years. The building was one of those gleaming medical complexes that announce success through marble floors and expensive artwork. I sat in the waiting room among patients who looked at me with the mild curiosity reserved for people who clearly didn't belong in their carefully orchestrated world. When David finally emerged from his office, his face cycled through surprise, annoyance, and something that might have been guilt. "Mom? What are you doing here? Do you have an appointment?" "I need to speak with you," I said, holding up the trust documents. "About these papers you signed without telling me." His expression hardened. "Let's go to my office." The office was larger than my living room, with a view of the Hudson River that probably cost more in rent than I spent on groceries in a year. Medical diplomas lined the walls, along with photos of David shaking hands with important-looking people at conferences and award ceremonies. There was one family photo: David, Jennifer, and Emma at some tropical resort, all of them tan and laughing. I wasn't in any of the pictures. "The trust was necessary," David said, settling behind his desk with the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions about other people's lives. "You're making mistakes, Mom. Forgetting to pay bills, leaving appliances running, getting confused about dates and appointments. Jennifer and I are worried about you. Worried enough to steal my money, but not worried enough to visit me," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Not worried enough to remember my birthday or help me with my medical appointments." David's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. We have our own lives, our own responsibilities. Emma's applying to colleges. Jennifer's mother is having health issues. My practice is busier than ever. We can't drop everything every time you need something. I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to treat me like a person instead of a problem to be managed." "You are a problem," David said, and the words hung in the air like a slap. "You're getting older, Mom. You need more help than you're willing to admit. The trust ensures that your money is available for your care when you need it." "My money," I repeated. "The money your father and I saved for 40 years. The money I earned cleaning offices at night so you could go to medical school. The money that's supposed to give me choices in how I spend my final years." "You still have choices," David said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "You just can't make expensive mistakes anymore." I stood up, my purse clutched in both hands like a shield. "I want you to dissolve the trust. I want my accounts returned to my control. I want my autonomy back." David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom, you can't just walk into my office and demand things. The trust was created for your protection. If you're upset about this, we can discuss it with Jennifer present. Maybe we need to look at other options for your care." Other options. The threat was clear. Comply with their decisions or face even more dramatic restrictions on my independence. I'd seen it happen to other women my age, their children using legal manipulation to justify decisions that serve their own convenience rather than their parents' best interests. "I see," I said quietly. "This isn't about protection at all. This is about control. That evening, I called Emma's cell phone. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice carrying the distracted tone of someone who'd been interrupted by an inconvenience. "Hi, Grandma Margaret. What's up?" "I wanted to talk to you about something important," I said. "About the trust your father created using my money." There was a pause. "I don't really know about that stuff," Emma said. "That's between you and Dad." "Emma, I'm your grandmother. I've loved you since the day you were born. I've watched you grow up, celebrated your achievements, supported your dreams. Don't you think I deserve better than being treated like a burden?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Grandma, you're not a burden, but you do forget things sometimes. Like, you called me 3 times last week to tell me the same story about your neighbor's cat." I hadn't realized I'd repeated the story. The small humiliation burned in my chest, but I pressed on. "Forgetting small things doesn't make me incompetent. It doesn't give anyone the right to control my life. I think Dad and Mom just want to make sure you're safe," Emma said, and I could hear the echo of her parents' words in her voice. "Maybe you should talk to them about it." I did talk to them. They've already decided I'm too old and confused to make my own decisions. "I have to go, Grandma. I'm studying for my SATs. Can we talk about this later?" But we both knew there wouldn't be a later. Emma had been trained to see me as a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. The conversation ended with polite promises to call soon that we both knew were lies. Jennifer arrived at my house the next morning, unannounced and uninvited. She stood on my porch wearing the kind of casual outfit that costs more than my monthly utilities bill, her expression carefully composed in what I'd learned to recognize as her dealing with difficult people face. "May I come in?" she asked, though she was already stepping through the doorway. I led her to the living room, where she perched on the edge of my sofa, as if afraid prolonged contact might contaminate her expensive clothes. "David told me about your conversation yesterday," she said. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about the trust." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "My son stole my financial independence without my knowledge or consent." Jennifer's smile tightened. "Margaret, no one stole anything. David was protecting assets that need to be preserved for your long-term care. Do you have any idea how much assisted living costs? How much memory care facilities charge? We're trying to ensure you have options when the time comes." "When the time comes for what?" "When you can no longer live independently," Jennifer said with the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a child. "The signs are already there. The forgetfulness, the confusion, the way you repeat stories. David has medical training. He can recognize cognitive decline better than you can." The casual cruelty of her words took my breath away. "I'm sitting here having a perfectly rational conversation with you. I'm discussing complex financial matters. I'm defending my rights. Does that sound like cognitive decline to you?" "Dementia patients often have moments of clarity," Jennifer said. "They can seem completely normal one minute and completely confused the next. That's what makes it so dangerous." I stared at her. This woman who'd married my son and somehow convinced herself that she had the right to diagnose my mental state based on convenience rather than medical evidence. "Have you ever considered that maybe I repeat stories because I'm lonely? That maybe I forget things because I'm grieving? That maybe I seem confused because I'm being systematically excluded from my own family?" Jennifer's expression didn't change. "I think you're being dramatic. David and I have discussed this extensively. The trust is staying in place. If you continue to fight this, we might need to explore other options." "What other options?" "Supervised living arrangements. Places where trained professionals can monitor your daily activities and ensure your safety." The threat was clear. Accept the financial control or face institutionalization. I'd seen it happen to other women. Children who used the legal system to strip away their parents' autonomy, then justified it as loving protection. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "Margaret, I'm trying to help you understand. I want you to leave my house. Now." Jennifer stood up, smoothing her clothes with the satisfied air of someone who'd accomplished their mission. "I hope you'll reconsider your position. David and I only want what's best for you." After she left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the photographs and memories of a life I'd built through love and sacrifice. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel defeated. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anger. Clean, bright, clarifying anger that burned away the fog of confusion and self-doubt. They thought they could manipulate me because I was old. They thought they could control me because I was alone. They thought they could steal my autonomy because I'd been trained to prioritize their needs over my own dignity. But they were wrong. I was still Margaret Chen, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to put her son through medical school. I was still the woman who'd nursed her husband through his final illness with patience and devotion. I was still the woman who'd raised a family, managed a household, and navigated 40 years of marriage with strength and intelligence. And I was done being afraid of them. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Harold Brennan had been Robert's lawyer for 23 years, handling our wills, our house purchase, and the small legal matters that accumulate over a lifetime of responsible living. His office smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a comforting masculine scent that reminded me of Robert's study on Sunday afternoons. Harold was 78 years old, with silver hair and the kind of patient demeanor that came from decades of helping people navigate life's legal complexities. When I called him about the trust, his voice carried a note of surprise that quickly shifted to concern. "Margaret, I reviewed the documents you faxed to me," he said, adjusting his reading glasses as he spread the papers across his mahogany desk. "I have to tell you, this is highly irregular. Creating a trust of this magnitude without the primary beneficiary's knowledge or consent, it's legally questionable at best." "But David is a doctor," I said, still struggling to understand how my son had managed to manipulate the system so completely. He told the financial advisors that I was cognitively impaired. Harold's expression darkened. A cardiologist's opinion about cognitive function carries no more legal weight than a mechanic's opinion about heart surgery. To establish mental incompetence, you need proper neurological evaluation, psychiatric assessment, and court approval. David bypassed all the proper channels. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flutter of hope. "Can we reverse it?" "We can challenge it," Harold said carefully, "but it won't be easy. Financial institutions are risk-averse. They'll require substantial documentation to prove you're mentally competent. David will likely fight any attempt to dissolve the trust, especially if he's concerned about your ability to manage your assets." "He's not concerned about my ability," I said, the words coming out harder than I'd intended. "He's concerned about his inheritance. He wants to make sure I don't spend his money on my own care." Harold nodded grimly. "I've seen this pattern before. Adult children who view their parents' assets as their own future security. It's more common than you'd think, especially in families where significant wealth is involved." Over the next 2 weeks, Harold worked with methodical precision to build a case for my mental competence. I underwent neurological testing at Columbia Presbyterian, submitted to psychological evaluations, and provided medical records dating back 5 years. Every test came back normal. Every evaluation confirmed what I'd known all along. I was a grieving widow dealing with normal age-related memory fluctuations, not a woman sliding into dementia. The neurologist, Dr. Sarah Kim, was particularly helpful. "Mrs. Chen, your cognitive function is well within normal parameters for your age," she said, reviewing my test results. "You show no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other condition that would impair your judgment. Some forgetfulness is completely normal as we age. It doesn't constitute mental incompetence." Armed with this medical evidence, Harold filed a formal challenge to the trust. The paperwork was served to David at his office, and I imagined his shock when he realized I wasn't the confused, helpless woman he'd assumed I was. His phone call came that evening, his voice tight with anger. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? Harold Brennan called my office today. You're challenging the trust?" "I'm reclaiming my autonomy," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Something you stole from me without my knowledge or consent. I didn't steal anything. I protected assets that you're not capable of managing properly. According to Dr. Kim at Columbia Presbyterian, I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. According to 3 independent psychological evaluations, I'm mentally competent. According to Harold Brennan, what you did was legally questionable." There was a long pause. "You had yourself tested?" "I had myself tested because my son accused me of being mentally incompetent without ever suggesting I see a doctor. I had myself tested because I wanted proof that I'm the same woman who raised him, educated him, and supported him through every challenge he ever faced. "This is ridiculous," David said, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "You're wasting money on lawyers and doctors because you're too stubborn to accept help." "I'm not rejecting help. I'm rejecting control. There's a difference." The legal process moved slowly, but I felt stronger with each passing day. For the first time in months, I had a purpose beyond simply enduring each day. I had a fight worth fighting, a goal worth pursuing. While Harold navigated the legal complexities, I began making other changes. I started with small acts of rebellion, buying groceries without checking my budget twice, purchasing a new dress simply because I liked the color, treating myself to lunch at a restaurant I'd never tried. The dress was navy blue with small white flowers, the kind of pattern that would have seemed frivolous when I was younger, but now felt like a declaration of independence. I wore it to my appointment with Dr. Kim, and she commented on how lovely it looked. "Thank you," I said, smoothing the fabric over my hips. "I bought it because I wanted to, not because I needed it." Dr. Kim smiled. "Sometimes wanting something is reason enough." The lunch at Romano's, a small Italian restaurant near the hospital, was my first meal alone in a restaurant in over a year. I ordered the seafood risotto, drank a glass of white wine, and read a book while I ate. The other diners glanced at me occasionally. A woman dining alone still drew attention, but I didn't care. I was reclaiming the simple pleasure of eating good food in a pleasant atmosphere. The server, a young man with kind eyes, refilled my wine glass without being asked. "Good book?" he asked, nodding toward the novel I'd been reading. "Very good," I said. "It's about a woman who discovers she's stronger than she thought." "Sounds like a story worth reading," he said. And I realized he was right. It was exactly the story I needed to hear. But the most significant change was in my relationship with Emma. Instead of waiting for her to call me, I began reaching out to her on my own terms. Not with the desperate neediness that had characterized our recent interactions, but with genuine interest in her life and activities. When she mentioned struggling with her college application essays, I offered to help. "I used to teach writing," I reminded her. "I might be able to offer some perspective." "Really?" Emma sounded surprised. "I mean, if you don't mind." We spent 3 hours on the phone that Sunday, working through her personal statement for Columbia. I helped her organize her thoughts, refine her arguments, and find her authentic voice. For the first time in years, I felt useful to her, valued for my experience and intelligence, rather than tolerated out of obligation. "Grandma Margaret," Emma said as we finished editing her final paragraph, "this is really good. I didn't know you were such a good writer." "I taught high school English for 30 years, I said gently. "I helped hundreds of students with their college applications." "I forgot you were a teacher," Emma said, and I heard genuine surprise in her voice. "Dad always talks about how you supported him through medical school, but he never mentions your own career." The comment stung, but it also illuminated something important. David had reduced my identity to his support system, erasing my professional accomplishments and personal achievements. In his version of our family history, I existed only in relation to him. "I loved teaching," I said. "I loved helping young people discover their potential, develop their voices, learn to think critically about the world around them." "Maybe you could help me with my other essays too," Emma asked. "I have 6 more schools to apply to." "I'd be honored," I said, and meant it. 3 weeks after filing the legal challenge, Harold called with good news. "The financial institution has agreed to dissolve the trust," he said. "They reviewed the medical evidence and concluded that David overstepped his authority. Your accounts will be returned to your full control within 5 business days." I sat in my kitchen, holding the phone, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Victory. It was small, perhaps, but it was mine. I had fought for my rights, and won. That afternoon, I drove to the bank to speak with the manager who'd processed David's trust documents. She was a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed and clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mrs. Chen, I want to apologize for the confusion," she said. "We followed standard procedures based on the medical documentation provided. But in retrospect, we should have required more thorough verification. I understand, I said, but I want to make sure this never happens again. I want to add a note to my accounts that any changes require my physical presence and notarized consent. Of course, we'll make sure your accounts are fully protected. Walking out of that bank, I felt taller than I had in months. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of turning leaves and the promise of change. I stopped at a coffee shop and ordered an expensive latte, not because I needed caffeine, but because I wanted to celebrate with something special. The young barista handed me the drink with a smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" she said. "Yes," I said, meaning it for the first time in months. "It really is." That night, I called David. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with resignation. "I heard about the trust," he said. "Harold says the paperwork will be finalized by Friday." "Mom, I want you to know that I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you. By declaring me mentally incompetent? By taking away my right to make my own financial decisions? By making sure you wouldn't be vulnerable to scams or poor judgment? You're 72 years old, living alone, dealing with grief. People in your situation are targets. People in my situation are also human beings with the right to make their own choices, even poor ones. That's what dignity means, David. The right to succeed or fail on your own terms." There was a long pause. "So, what happens now?" "Now I live my life according to my own decisions. I make my own choices about my care, my money, my future. And maybe, if you're interested, we can rebuild a relationship based on respect, rather than control. I never meant to control you, but you did. And now we both have to live with the consequences." After I hung up, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the photographs and memories of a life I'd built through love and sacrifice. But for the first time in months, I wasn't looking backward with regret. I was looking forward with anticipation. I had won my first battle. I had reclaimed my autonomy. I had proven to myself and to others that I was still capable of fighting for what mattered to me. And tomorrow, I would wake up in my own home, with my own money, free to make my own choices about how to spend whatever time I had left. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. The family meeting was Jennifer's idea, though she presented it as a loving intervention rather than the ambush it actually was. The call came on a Wednesday morning, her voice carefully modulated to suggest concern rather than the calculating hostility I'd learned to recognize. "Margaret, we need to talk, all of us together," she said. "David is worried about you living alone after everything that's happened. Emma misses you, and I think we all need to clear the air." I knew it was a trap, but I also knew it was time. The legal victory had given me back my financial independence, but it hadn't addressed the fundamental problem. My family saw me as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected. That perception wouldn't change through legal documents or medical evaluations. It would only change through direct confrontation. "When and where?" I asked. "Sunday afternoon. Our house. Emma will be there. And David's been hoping you'd come by to see the renovations we've done." Renovations funded by the income from David's practice, built on the foundation of the education I'd helped pay for. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent the 3 days before the meeting preparing in ways that would have seemed strange to anyone who didn't understand the psychological warfare of family dynamics. I had my hair professionally styled at a salon I'd never been able to afford when I was supporting David's education. I bought a new outfit. Not the practical clothes I'd worn for decades, but something that made me feel confident and authoritative. The dress was charcoal gray with subtle silver threads, paired with the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw not an elderly woman to be pitied, but a person who commanded respect. The transformation was as much internal as external. Harold had prepared me for what to expect. "They'll try to convince you that you're making poor decisions," he'd said. "They'll present their control as protection, their interference as love. Don't let them reframe the narrative. You're not a confused old woman. You're a competent adult asserting her rights." Sunday arrived gray and cold, with the kind of persistent rain that made the world look washed out and tired. I drove to David's house in Westchester, through neighborhoods where the houses grew larger and more imposing with each mile. His home was a colonial revival, with perfectly manicured landscaping, The kind of place that announced success without subtlety. Jennifer answered the door wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Her smile was bright and artificial, the expression of someone who'd practiced looking welcoming in the mirror. "Margaret, you look wonderful. Come in, come in." The house smelled of expensive candles and fresh flowers, every surface polished to a gleam that suggested a cleaning service rather than personal care. The renovations Jennifer had mentioned were extensive: new hardwood floors, updated kitchen with granite countertops, a living room that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. David emerged from his study wearing the kind of weekend attire that people in his tax bracket favored: khakis and a polo shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. He kissed my cheek with the perfunctory affection of someone fulfilling a social obligation. "Mom, you look nice. How was the drive?" "Fine," I said, settling into the chair they'd clearly designated for me, positioned slightly apart from the main seating area, as if I were a guest rather than family. Emma appeared last, looking uncomfortable in the way teenagers do when forced to participate in adult conversations. She was beautiful at 17, with long blonde hair and the kind of effortless grace that comes from never having to worry about money or acceptance. She hugged me briefly, genuinely, and I caught a whiff of the expensive perfume that Jennifer had probably bought her. "Hi, Grandma Margaret," she said, settling onto the couch next to her mother. "I liked the book you recommended, the one about the woman who starts over." "I'm glad," I said, noting how Jennifer's smile tightened slightly at this evidence of our ongoing relationship. David wasted no time getting to the point. "Mom, we're concerned about you. The legal challenge to the trust, the way you've been acting lately. It's not like you. We think you might be going through something that's affecting your judgment." "My judgment is fine," I said calmly. "I consulted with a lawyer because my son stole my financial independence. I underwent medical testing because my family accused me of being mentally incompetent. I'm acting exactly like someone who's defending her rights." Jennifer leaned forward with the expression of someone who'd been trained in conflict resolution. "Margaret, no one is questioning your rights. We're questioning whether you're making decisions that are in your best interest." "Such as?" "Such as spending money on expensive lawyers when you should be saving for your future care needs," David said. "Such as refusing to consider assisted living options that would give you more security and social interaction." "I haven't refused to consider anything," I said. "I've refused to let other people make decisions for me without my input or consent." Emma shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma, we just want to make sure you're safe. That house is so big for one person, and you're there all alone. I've been living in that house for 37 years, I said gently. "It's my home, not my prison. And I'm alone because the people I love have decided I'm too much trouble to visit regularly." The room fell silent. Jennifer's carefully composed expression cracked slightly, revealing the irritation she'd been hiding. "That's not fair," David said. "We have our own lives, our own responsibilities. We can't be at your beck and call every time you need something." "I'm not asking you to be at my beck and call. I'm asking you to treat me with basic respect, to include me in decisions about my own life, to remember that I'm a person with feelings and preferences, not a problem to be solved." "You're being dramatic," Jennifer said, her voice cooling. "No one has treated you disrespectfully. We've tried to help you, and you fought us every step of the way." I opened my purse and pulled out a folder that Harold had helped me prepare. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the medical evaluations, and a timeline of events that I'd constructed over the past month. "Let me show you what respect looks like," I said, spreading the papers on the coffee table. "These are the trust documents that David signed without my knowledge, using his medical credentials to declare me mentally incompetent. These are the results of 3 independent psychological evaluations, showing that I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. And this is a timeline of every time I've asked for help, support, or simple companionship in the past 6 months." I pointed to the timeline, with its stark record of forgotten birthdays, canceled visits, and dismissed requests for assistance. Respect would have been David consulting with me before making decisions about my money. Respect would have been someone accompanying me to important medical appointments instead of telling me to take notes. Respect would have been remembering that I exist between the times when you need to feel good about yourselves by checking on poor mom. Emma was staring at the timeline with an expression of growing horror. Grandma, I didn't know. I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you've been trained to see me as a burden rather than a person, I said. All of you have. I'm not your mother or grandmother anymore. I'm your obligation. David's face was flushed with anger. That's not true. We love you. Love isn't a feeling, I said, standing up with more authority than I'd felt in months. Love is a choice. Love is action. Love is showing up, paying attention, treating someone with dignity, even when it's inconvenient. I walked to the mantelpiece, where family photos were arranged in expensive frames. Most of them were from Emma's childhood, with a few wedding pictures and professional portraits. I was in exactly 3 of the dozens of photos, always positioned at the edge of the group, as if I were a guest rather than family. I spent 40 years loving you that way, I said, looking directly at David. I chose you over my own comfort, my own dreams, my own needs. I worked multiple jobs to pay for your education. I sacrificed my social life to support your activities. I gave you everything I had to give, and I never asked for anything in return except to be treated with dignity in my final years. You're talking like we've abandoned you, Jennifer said. We visit, we call, we include you in holidays. You visit when it's convenient. You call when you need something. You include me in holidays like I'm a charity case who should be grateful for your attention. I turned back to face them, these people who shared my blood and my history, but had forgotten what it meant to be family. I'm 72 years old. I buried my husband 3 years ago. I'm dealing with the normal challenges of aging in a culture that treats elderly people like they're already dead. The least I should expect from my family is basic respect. What do you want from us? David asked, his voice tight with frustration. I want you to see me as a person, not a problem. I want you to include me in decisions about my own life. I want you to visit because you enjoy my company, not because you feel obligated to check on me. I want you to remember that I'm still the woman who raised you, who supported you, who loved you unconditionally even when you were difficult. Emma was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, Grandma. I really am. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. You didn't make me feel bad, sweetheart. You just forgot to make me feel valued. There's a difference. Jennifer stood up, her composure finally cracking completely. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we've committed some terrible crime by trying to help you. Maybe if you weren't so stubborn, so resistant to change, we could have a better relationship. Maybe if you weren't so eager to control me, so quick to dismiss my preferences, so determined to solve problems I don't have, we could have a relationship based on mutual respect instead of condescension. I gathered my papers and put them back in my purse. I'm not asking you to solve my problems. I'm asking you to stop creating new ones. I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm asking you to treat me like someone worth caring about. David stood up, his face a mixture of anger and something that might have been shame. So what happens now? Are we supposed to pretend that none of this happened? What happens now is that I go home to my house with my money and live my life according to my own choices. What happens now is that you decide whether you want to be part of that life on terms of mutual respect, or whether you want to continue treating me like a burden to be managed. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors with a sound that seemed to echo through the house. Emma followed me, catching my arm gently. Grandma, wait. I want to do better. I want to be a better granddaughter. I turned and cupped her face in my hands, looking into eyes that were so much like David's had been when he was young and still believed I was the most important person in his world. You don't have to be a better granddaughter, I said softly. You just have to remember that I'm still here, still thinking, still feeling, still capable of loving you and being loved by you. That's all anyone wants, to be seen, to be valued, to matter. I kissed her forehead and walked out into the rain, leaving behind the house that represented everything I'd sacrificed to build and everything I'd lost in the process. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I felt like I was walking toward something better. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Not the artificial lightness that comes from avoiding problems, but the authentic relief that follows when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours to bear. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom windows, the same windows I'd looked through for 37 years. But somehow the light seemed different now, clearer, more golden. I lay in bed for a few extra minutes, listening to the sounds of my neighborhood waking up. Mrs. Patterson's dog barking at the mailman, the distant hum of traffic on Northern Boulevard, the cheerful chaos of children waiting for the school bus. These sounds had been the soundtrack of my life for decades, but I'd stopped really hearing them during the months when grief and family drama had muffled everything except my own pain. Now they felt like a symphony, welcoming me back to a world I'd forgotten I was still part of. I made coffee using the good china cup, the one from my wedding set that I'd been saving for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. Today felt special enough. I was celebrating my own liberation, toasting my return to myself. The phone rang while I was sitting at my kitchen table, planning my day with the kind of intentionality I hadn't felt in months. The caller ID showed Emma's number, and I felt a flutter of both hope and wariness. "Hi, Grandma Margaret," she said, her voice soft and uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I know yesterday was a lot. It's always okay for you to call me," I said. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Confused, I guess, and kind of ashamed. I keep thinking about all the times I could have visited you, or called just to talk, and I didn't. I've been so focused on college applications and my friends that I forgot you might be lonely." The honesty in her voice made my chest tight with emotion. "Sweetheart, you're 17 years old. You're supposed to be focused on your own life, your own future. That's normal and healthy. But I could have included you more. Like, I never told you about Jake. That's my boyfriend. Or about how stressed I am about getting into college. Or about the fight I had with Mom about prom dresses. I used to tell you everything when I was little." "You still can," I said, "if you want to." We talked for an hour and a half. Emma told me about Jake, who played guitar and wanted to study environmental science. She told me about her college anxieties, her complicated relationship with her mother's expectations, her fear that she wasn't smart enough or special enough to succeed at the school she wanted to attend. I listened with the kind of attention I'd once given to David's childhood worries, offering advice when she asked for it, but mostly just providing the safe space that people need to sort through their own thoughts out loud. "Grandma," Emma said as our conversation wound down, "would it be okay if I came to visit you this weekend? Just me, I mean. I'd like to see your house again, and maybe you could show me some of the old photo albums. I feel like I don't know enough about our family history." "I would love that," I said, meaning it completely. After we hung up, I realized that this was what I'd been missing. Not just contact with my family, but meaningful connection. The kind of relationship where both people matter, where both voices are heard, where love flows in both directions instead of being extracted like a resource. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my old friend Susan Carradine. We'd taught together at the same high school for 15 years, maintaining a close friendship even after retirement. But after Robert's death, I'd gradually withdrawn from all my friendships, too wrapped up in grief and family obligations to maintain the social connections that had once brought me joy. "Margaret Chen," Susan's voice was warm with delight. "I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are you, honey?" I'm better than I've been in a long time," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I'm so glad to hear that. I've been worried about you. I tried calling a few times after Robert's funeral, but you seemed to need space, so I didn't want to intrude." "I did need space then," I said, "but I think I'm ready for company now, if you're available." We made plans to meet for lunch the next day at a little cafe near the college where we'd both taken continuing education classes. Susan suggested we visit the campus afterward, maybe sit in on a lecture or browse the bookstore like we used to do when we were still teaching and hungry for new ideas. The prospect of intellectual stimulation, of conversations about books and ideas and the wider world beyond my family's drama, felt like a gift I'd forgotten I was allowed to give myself. That evening, I did something even more radical. I called a travel agent. "I'd like to plan a trip," I told the young woman who answered the phone. "Somewhere I've never been. Somewhere that requires a passport. I'd always wanted to see Ireland. the green countryside, the ancient castles, the literary history that connected to my love of teaching English. Robert and I had talked about going there for our retirement, but his illness had intervened, and after his death the idea had seemed impossible. Too expensive, too complicated, too ambitious for a woman my age traveling alone. But why was it too ambitious? I had the money now, the freedom, the time. I had the legal right to spend my own resources on my own dreams. More importantly, I had the newfound understanding that I deserved to pursue experiences that brought me joy, not just fulfill obligations that brought others convenience. The travel agent was enthusiastic and helpful, sending me brochures for small group tours designed for mature travelers. "Ireland is beautiful in the spring," she said. "The countryside is so green it almost hurts your eyes, and the people are incredibly welcoming." I spent the evening looking through glossy photographs of stone cottages and cliffside paths, imagining myself walking through landscapes that existed in poems I'd taught for decades. For the first time since Robert's death, I was planning something for myself, rather than simply enduring each day as it came. My lunch with Susan the next day was a revelation. We met at a small bistro near Queen's College, where we'd both taken graduate courses years earlier when we were young teachers eager to improve our skills and advance our careers. Susan looked wonderful, silver-haired and elegant, wearing the kind of flowing scarf that suggested someone who'd learned to dress for her own pleasure rather than other people's approval. She embraced me warmly, holding me for an extra moment in the way of friends who understand that physical affection becomes more precious as we age. "You look different," she said, studying my face as we settled into our booth. "More like yourself, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said. "I feel more like myself than I have in months." Over soup and sandwiches, I told her about the trust, the confrontation with David and Jennifer, my decision to reclaim my autonomy. Susan listened with the kind of focused attention that good teachers develop, asking clarifying questions and offering perspective without trying to solve problems that weren't hers to fix. "I went through something similar with my daughter after Tom died," she said. "Not the financial control, but the assumption that I was suddenly incapable of making my own decisions. Karen kept talking about Mom's situation, like I was a puzzle to be solved rather than a person to be consulted. How did you handle it?" "I moved to Florida," Susan said with a laugh. "Not to spite her, but because I'd always wanted to live near the ocean. I bought a little condo in Sarasota, joined a book club, started taking art classes." Karen was furious at first. How dare I make major life decisions without consulting her? But after a few months, she realized I was happier than I'd been in years. "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second. I miss my grandchildren, but I see them during holidays and school breaks, and our time together is better because it's intentional rather than obligatory. I'm not the sad widow sitting in her dead husband's house anymore. I'm the grandmother who lives an interesting life that they want to hear about." After lunch, we walked around the college campus, where spring flowers were beginning to bloom in carefully tended beds. Students hurried between buildings with the focused energy of people who believed their entire futures depended on the papers they were writing and the exams they were studying for. "I miss teaching," I said, watching a group of young women engaged in animated discussion about something they'd obviously just learned in class. "So do I," Susan said. "But I don't miss the bureaucracy, the testing obsession, the way education became more about compliance than curiosity." We stopped at the bookstore, where I bought a travel guide for Ireland, and Susan found a novel by an author we'd both discovered at a conference years earlier. The simple act of buying books felt like reclaiming part of my identity. I was still an intellectual person, still curious about the world, still eager to learn new things. Walking back to our cars, Susan linked her arm through mine in the companionable way of old friends. "I'm proud of you," she said. "It takes courage to fight for your own dignity, especially when the people you're fighting are the ones you love most." "I'm not fighting them," I said. "I'm fighting for myself." "There's a difference." That evening, Emma came to visit as promised. She arrived carrying a bottle of wine and a box of expensive chocolates, gifts that suggested she was treating this as a special occasion rather than an obligatory family duty. "I brought wine because I thought we could have a sophisticated conversation," she said with a slight smile. "And chocolate because Well, chocolate makes everything better. We sat in my living room with the photo albums spread across the coffee table, and I told her stories I hadn't shared in years. About her grandfather's medical school adventures, about David's childhood obsession with dinosaurs, about the day Emma herself was born, and how proud I'd been to become a grandmother. "I want to know about you, too," Emma said as we looked through pictures of her as a baby. "Not just as Mom's mother or Grandpa's wife, but about your own life. What were you like when you were my age?" I told her about my college years, my early teaching career, my dreams of being a writer before marriage and motherhood redirected my energies. I showed her some of my old lesson plans, yellowed and fragile but still containing ideas I'd been passionate about. "You were so accomplished," Emma said, reading through a unit I'd designed on women's literature. "I never knew you'd created all this curriculum. Dad never talks about your career." "Your father sees me primarily in relation to himself," I said gently. "It's not uncommon. Children often have trouble seeing their parents as complete people with their own interests and achievements." "I don't want to be like that," Emma said. "I want to know all of you, not just the grandmother parts." As the evening wound down, Emma helped me clean up the dishes and pack away the photo albums. At the door, she hugged me tightly, the way she used to when she was small and didn't want visits to end. "I love you, Grandma Margaret," she said. "The real you, not just the version that exists to take care of other people." After she left, I sat in my quiet house, feeling more content than I had in months. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. The solitude wasn't abandonment. It was freedom. I was still Margaret Chen, but I was also becoming someone new. Someone who valued her own happiness, who pursued her own interests, who refused to accept love that came with conditions and demands. The woman who had spent decades serving others was learning to serve herself, and it felt like coming home. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a small cafe in Galway, Ireland, watching the rain create rivulets down ancient stone walls while I write postcards to Emma. The coffee is strong and bitter, the way Irish coffee should be, and my hands are steady as I describe the cliffs of Moher, where yesterday I stood at the edge of the world and felt more alive than I had in years. The woman at the next table is reading a book of Yeats poetry, occasionally looking up to smile at the group of musicians tuning their instruments in the corner. Soon this place will fill with music and laughter, with stories told in accents that turn every sentence into a song. I'll stay for the session, nursing another coffee, and letting the melodies wash over me like a baptism. I never imagined I'd be the kind of woman who traveled alone to foreign countries, who struck up conversations with strangers, who booked tours and navigated airports with the confidence of someone who belonged in the wider world. But here I am, wearing a soft green sweater I bought in Dublin, and carrying a leather journal where I've been recording not just the places I've seen, but the thoughts and feelings that emerge when you finally give yourself permission to exist fully. The Ireland trip was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. I joined a small group tour of 12 people, mostly women in their 60s and 70s who, like me, had reached the age where we'd stopped waiting for other people to validate our dreams. We called ourselves the Silver Adventurers, and by the third day, we were finishing each other's sentences and sharing stories we'd never told our own families. There was Patricia from Boston, whose children thought she was too old to travel internationally. She proved them wrong by climbing every castle tower we encountered, often faster than people half her age. There was Helen from Vancouver, who'd never seen the ocean until her husband died, and left her free to pursue the wanderlust she'd suppressed for 40 years of marriage. "You know what I realized?" Helen said one evening as we sat in a pub in Killarney, listening to a fiddler whose music seemed to come from some ancient place in his soul. "I spent so many years being afraid of being alone that I forgot being alone meant being free." Those words echoed in my mind as I stood on the cliffs of Moher, wind whipping my hair and salt spray stinging my cheeks. I thought about Robert, about the life we'd built together, and for the first time since his death, I felt gratitude rather than grief. He would have loved this place, but I was capable of loving it without him. His death had ended our marriage, but it hadn't ended my capacity for wonder, for joy, for discovery. I thought about David, too, and the strange relief that came from no longer trying to earn his approval. The trust battle had taught me that his love came with conditions I was no longer willing to meet. He wanted a mother who was grateful for his reluctant attention, who accepted his control without question, who validated his importance by diminishing her own. I couldn't be that woman anymore, and the freedom was intoxicating. The postcard I'm writing to Emma features a photograph of the Ring of Kerry, all emerald hills and ancient stone circles. Dearest Emma, I write, today I learned that standing stones have been here for over 4,000 years, put in place by people whose names we'll never know, but whose reverence for this land we can still feel. It made me think about the kinds of monuments we leave behind, not just stone and bronze, but the impact we have on the people we love. I hope I'm building something beautiful in your memory. Emma and I have grown closer over these months, not through the desperate neediness that characterized my early grief, but through genuine mutual interest and respect. She calls me every Tuesday evening, not because she has to, but because she wants to. She tells me about her senior year challenges, her college acceptances, her changing relationship with her parents as she prepares to leave home. Last month, she asked if she could spend part of her spring break with me instead of going to Cancun with her friends. I want to help you plan your next trip, she said. Maybe somewhere we could go together when I'm in college. The idea of traveling with Emma, of being the kind of grandmother who introduces her grandchild to the wider world rather than simply existing on its margins, filled me with a joy I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. But perhaps the most surprising relationship that's blossomed is the one with David. Not the relationship I'd spent decades hoping for, the devoted son who recognized and appreciated his mother's sacrifices, but something more honest and ultimately more sustainable. It started 3 weeks after I returned from Ireland, when he called to ask about my trip. Not the perfunctory, "How was your vacation?" that people offer out of politeness, but genuine curiosity about what I'd seen and done. "Mom, Emma showed me the photos you sent her," he said. "You look different. Happy." "I am happy," I said. "Probably happier than I've been since your father died. I've been thinking about what you said that day at our house, about being seen as a person rather than a problem. I think maybe you were right." The conversation was awkward at first, full of the careful politeness that people use when they're trying to rebuild trust they've damaged. But gradually, over subsequent calls and visits, we've found a new rhythm. David no longer tries to manage my life, and I no longer expect him to be the center of his. He tells me about his work, his struggles with the administrative side of medicine, his worries about Emma leaving for college. I listen with the kind of attention I'd give any adult friend sharing their concerns. He's still not the son I'd imagined raising, and I'm no longer the mother he thought he wanted. But we're learning to be the people we actually are with each other, rather than the roles we thought we were supposed to play. Jennifer remains coolly polite, but I no longer need her approval. I greet her with pleasant neutrality, include her in conversations without forcing intimacy, and don't take her distance personally. She's David's wife, Emma's mother, and my daughter-in-law in the legal sense. That's enough. I don't need her to love me, and I've stopped trying to earn something she's clearly not interested in giving. The house in Queens has become something different too. Not the shrine to my marriage that it was in the months after Robert's death, but a home that reflects the woman I'm becoming, rather than just the woman I used to be. I've redecorated the bedroom, replacing the heavy furniture Robert preferred with lighter pieces that make the space feel more open and feminine. I've converted his study into a reading room, lined with the books I'd neglected during the years when his needs took precedence over my intellectual curiosity. Most importantly, I've started hosting again. Not the elaborate dinner parties I used to throw when I was trying to prove my worth through perfect hospitality, but casual gatherings of people I genuinely enjoy. Susan visits regularly, often bringing friends from her book club. Emma's friends sometimes stop by after school, drawn by the homemade cookies and the kind of unhurried conversation that's rare in their overscheduled lives. Last week, I hosted my first dinner party in 3 years. 6 women from my old teaching colleagues, sharing stories and laughter around the dining room table, where I'd eaten so many silent meals during my marriage. We talked about books and politics and travel dreams, about grandchildren and health scares, and the strange liberation that comes with aging past the point where other people's opinions carry much weight. You know what I love about getting older? said Mary Rodriguez, who'd taught Spanish for 30 years before retiring to become a master gardener. I've finally learned to disappoint people without apologizing for it. Her words sparked a round of confessions, small rebellions we'd each undertaken as we'd moved past the need to be universally liked and approved of. One woman had quit volunteering for a charity whose board treated her like a servant. Another had stopped hosting Christmas for ungrateful relatives who complained about her menu choices. A third had taken up painting, despite her adult children's protests that she was too old to start new hobbies. "We spent so many years being what other people needed us to be," said Catherine Walsh, my former department head. "It's revolutionary to finally ask what we need ourselves to be." As I finish the last of my Irish postcards, the musicians in the corner begin their session with a slow, haunting melody that seems to rise from the stone floors and settle in my bones. The cafe fills with locals and tourists alike, all of us drawn by the universal human need for music, for story, for connection. An elderly man at the bar catches my eye and raises his pint in a small salute. "Slínta," he says, which I've learned means health or cheers. I raise my coffee cup in response, smiling at this stranger who's acknowledged my presence without needing to know anything about my history or my struggles. This is what I'd been missing during those months of family drama and financial battles. The simple pleasure of existing in the world as myself, not as someone's mother or wife or burden, but as Margaret Chen, a woman with her own interests and opinions and capacity for joy. Tomorrow I fly home to New York, back to my life and my routine and my newly honest relationships. But I'm bringing something back with me, the knowledge that I'm still capable of growth, of change, of surprise. At 72, I'm not winding down. I'm just getting started. The music swells around me, and I close my eyes, letting it wash over me like a blessing. When I open them, the elderly man at the bar is still watching me, still smiling. "You look like someone who's found what she was looking for," he says in an accent thick as cream. "I wasn't looking for anything," I tell him. "I was just learning to stop settling for less than I deserved." He nods, as if this makes perfect sense. That's the hardest lesson of all, isn't it? Learning you're worth more than you thought. 6 months ago, I was a woman whose keys kept disappearing, whose family treated her like a confused old lady, whose autonomy had been stolen by people who claimed to love her. Tonight, I'm a woman writing postcards from Ireland, planning her next adventure, surrounded by music and strangers who see her as someone worth acknowledging. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened one choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of self-respect at a time. It happened when I finally understood that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just emotional labor disguised as affection. Have you ever felt like you lost yourself while trying to take care of everyone else around you? Have you ever realized that the people you were sacrificing for had stopped seeing you as a person worth valuing? Tell me in the comments below. I want to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, if you recognized yourself or someone you love in Margaret's journey, please give this video a like and subscribe to this channel. These stories need to reach the people who need to hear them most, the ones who are still waiting for permission to value themselves.